Thank you very much. We can do one of two things. We can move on to West Coast Shipyards. I have a couple announcements, or one announcement to make I'd like to read. We have to have a press availability, as is our custom, at the end of this morning and then again at the end of this afternoon. What is the consensus of the commissioners? Should we move to West Coast, or should we move to adjourn after the announcements for lunch?
Why don't we
and do West Coast
ahead?
All right, we'll continue and press ahead. Let me just mention if there's one announcement that is important, I think, simply because these hearings have attracted a lot of people for obvious reasons, and the room is very small, or relatively small, when it comes to these types of hearings. And therefore, due to the enormous interest and space limitations, I must ask that we make some adjustments after the break for lunch. Everything is, we'll do what we've done right now. We will continue to reserve seats in this room for members of Congress and other elected officials who deserve to be here. We will also accommodate members of the press. But unless you are a member of Congress, an elected official whose base is currently under consideration, or a member of the press whose job it is to follow this very closely, we must ask that you stand in line and wait for available seats on a rotating basis. I regret that we may be unable to fully accommodate everyone with an interest in this very important hearing. We'll make every effort to accommodate those people who came, but I ask your understanding because there's hundreds of people who came here, and we want to make sure they're given every opportunity to be in this room while their facility is being discussed. And as I mentioned before, about 5 minutes after the morning session is completed, we will have a press availability with the commissioners. All right, let's proceed with the West Coast Shipyards.
Moving on to, we'll first discuss Mare Island Naval Shipyard, slide 324. Pros and cons for the closure of Mare Island Naval Shipyard. Cons first. The ocean engineering program, which is a significant program at Mare Island Naval Shipyard, would have to be transferred elsewhere. Mare Island Naval Shipyard is the only Pacific yard in the continental U.S. With some Los Angeles class refueling experience. Although Mare Island cannot dock all classes of ships, they do work on all classes of ships. Some of those would be at Alameda, where they perform work on the carriers. And it is the community's contention that, the shipyard's contention that they can maintain their nuclear capacity while altering nuclear and conventional split to do more conventional work. The pros of closing Mare Island Naval Shipyard are that it does have a limited dry dock capacity capability. It does have the third largest, according to the BSEC calculation, capacity of any shipyard. And Mare Island Naval Shipyard is located in a high-cost area.
Larry, there's probably a good answer to this, but to have limited dry dock capability and yet have the third largest capacity seems somewhat inconsistent.
I never thought about that.
Go ahead. But they do seem, I think you could probably explain it around the types of vessels.
Mr. Stewart, the capacity is measured in the amount of direct labor man days that the facility can do work, and that's really a measurement of the overall size. The dry dock capability limitations are on types of ships. So clearly, when you have both the dry dock capacity and the size of the facility to do the work, then you can do more work than if you have just more capacity to do the direct labor part of the jobs. You are limited in some of the work that might be scheduled. So that the capacity measurement did not consider the details of the ship mix, in essence. It said that if you have enough ships and submarines that can fit into these dry docks, then you can do this amount of work. And in that measurement, Mare Island is the third largest by the Navy's calculation.
One of my hopes is the next commission will have less esoteric ways of measuring everything and more standardization.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
That's a good part of the answer, and as you know, in any depot that we encounter, we have some serious questions as to how the capacity,
Absolutely.
productivity, and other figures of merit are computed. Two other things that I'd like to mention, and that is that Mare Island, at least in the past, I personally don't have their current workload and work performance figures, have done a lot of work at Alameda. So that would account for some of it. And secondly, Mare Island, through some rather creative and innovative ways, have utilized the dry docks that they have, particularly one that is rather shallow. Without going into details, they have been able to utilize that where a few years ago they had not done so because they felt that they couldn't, but when people put their minds together and came up with these innovative ideas, they were able to utilize it.
Yes, sir, that's true. And one other thing that that comes to me is that because they do a high percentage of their work there, like Portsmouth on the East Coast, Mare Island works largely on submarines there. Submarines, because of the high degree of nuclear work involved and the sub-safe that's required afterwards, entail a, relative to other ships, they do entail a great deal of direct labor man hours be associated with their repair.
Thank you, sir.
Moving on to Long Beach Naval Shipyard, slide 325. Pros and cons for the closure of Long Beach Naval Shipyard, starting with cons. The financial stability of some of the private yards in the San Diego area is questionable. Dry dock number 1 at Long Beach Naval Shipyard is the West Coast alternate emergent carrier dry dock, and the Navy does wish to retain it. The Navy, I should clarify that, the Navy also has stated that they wish to retain Long Beach Naval Shipyard in addition to the dry dock. The private yards in San Diego are incapable of dry docking some of the larger ships which are home ported in San Diego, and I believe that number is 12 to 15 ships. The closest, or rather, Long Beach is the closest public yard to the fleet in San Diego, and that's largely, San Diego is the major fleet concentration on the West Coast. And then finally, surveys indicate that the costs to do work in a public shipyard and a private shipyard in that area are roughly the same. On the pro side of closing Long Beach Naval Shipyard, it is not co-located with the fleet. It is up the coast a ways.
Let me interrupt you there about on that cost question, because this is something we've heard everywhere we've been, is the sort of, what do they call it in the public power field, that the yardstick factor. That is the importance of keeping a public yard open in order to keep private yard costs down. Your statement here puts it in the positive, which says that costs between the public and private sector are about the same. That's because, is that because there is a public yard? And what experience have we had where there was no public yard and there were only private yards?
That's a difficult question, sir.
Mr. McPherson, in the studies that have been done that we've reviewed on the costs of doing work, some of that work that's been looked at as far as analyzing it includes what were private-private competition as well as public-private competition. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we have any really exceptionally good data from any studies that we've seen that really analyze the potential impact of going to more private-private versus a portion of them in public-private competitions and private-private. I think one of the important things to look at is, and to consider that if there is less public capability, public capacity, then you are going to have more work in the private sector. If that does mean that there is more private capacity available, then your private-private competition will be more vigorous. And so there are definitely trade-offs on both sides, and really the staff has not been able to come down to any conclusion. But clearly, having a strong public competitor in a marketplace, I think, does create competitive price pressures on the remaining competitors, whether it's between two public yards or between public and private.
And I think it's important to follow on to what Alex has said. It's important, the private sector, not only, the public sector not only functions to keep the private sector honest, which is not a nice term to use, but it works the other way around too. The private sector competition, the impetus for the public-private competition, according to a GAO report I've read, was originally that the public yards were getting too expensive, and they initiated the public-private competition to help the public yards get more efficient. Long Beach has done that quite well amongst the shipyards, it's my understanding.
The current break in the Navy, the current percentage share between public and private shipyard work?
Well, sir, currently, according to figures which I've obtained from the General Accounting Office testimony, the Navy does about 38% of its shipyard work with the private sector.
Most of the private sector work is in surface ships or conventionally powered ships, and most of the nuclear work and submarine work is done in the public yards. And they, in fact, are the most expensive. So you'll get fewer submarines with a lot of money in the public sector, and you get lots of surface ships in private yards.
Yes, sir. That's definitely the case. So fewer nuclear ships still equates to a great deal more money in the public sector.
Larry, we're all in agreement that competition is a good thing. Can I shift to another subject under your pros?
Yes, sir.
I have heard that the community of Long Beach has long-range hopes of utilizing this area for some public facilities that benefit the community.
Yes, sir. We received reports we did back, as you recall, in the 1991 commission, and also now that they do have plans for a major container port expansion in the Long Beach area.
Thank you.
What is the impact on a reuse plan of maintaining the dry dock?
Well, ma'am, getting into some legal terms here, the dry dock is largely located, dry dock number 1 is largely located on parcel R, which unfortunately I don't have a map of the dry dock, of the yard here with me. Parcel R runs along the waterfront. Basically it occupies the entire waterfront of the shipyard. It is, I believe, held in fee simple by the Navy, which means that the Navy legally can retain that. And another parcel which the dry dock just barely tips into is known as Area C, and Area C is owned by the Navy. You do not, it's my feeling that although you certainly want to retain the dry dock there, the Navy probably would not need all of parcel R, which runs along the waterfront, for its purposes of emergent carrier dry dockings at the dry dock number 1. But I would not want to answer for the Navy on that. It may be wise to give them the option to give part of that to the community at their, if it can be done legally, which I don't know.
Mrs. Cox, the expansion that Commissioner Stewart, I think, was referring to that we're aware of, that was planned, and all the information we've been provided about that was that it was planned around the continued existence of the shipyard. And so the plans that we've been presented do not, do not conflict with that. However, I would think that if the shipyard was there and the needs of the Navy were different, that I'm assuming that the community would re-look at their plan to see if any change in the Navy's requirements would allow them to do things in a different and possibly more efficient, more effective manner.
Well, there has been some concern expressed by the community that it would be difficult on a reuse plan when the Navy basically has in control and needs to have in control really the most important piece of property involved.
Yes, Ms. Cox, clearly, and we certainly had a lot of these discussions in '91 related to the Navy's proposal, which the Commission accepted in '91, to retain the industrial facility in Philadelphia and keep those dry docks mothballed and those industrial facilities mothballed. That is clearly a limitation on the reuse of that property, because some of the property is going to be retained in that situation.
I would like to get briefly back to the competition issue, unless this other question was not resolved. Yeah.
Go ahead.
There is a significant amount of information, including the GAO report that Larry alluded to. So it goes back some point in time. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is that it shows you that the issues are kind of a wash. At some times, the private sector has been lower, and other times they've been higher, both in the surface ship area, which is really the germane point here. I personally checked on some figures in the recent past, and Naval Sea Systems Command says that the recent data also shows that the return costs are about the same. What generally happens in the private sector is they come in with a lower bid than Long Beach Naval Shipyard would, but then through the processing of change orders and the like, that the eventual cost, again, is pretty much a wash. I asked about schedule performance, and they said they're both about the same. So, you know, unfortunately, in a decision-making context, we find that the data is remarkably similar, and it makes our decision-making in that regard harder. Shifting for just a moment, you alluded to this, I think, earlier, but I want to embellish on it more, and that is that among all the naval shipyards, Long Beach has demonstrated the greatest ability to perform like a private shipyard, if you will. They have, Mr. Stewart, you'd be particularly interested in this, they have shed bureaucracy and layers of management to the extent, and my information is a little old, but in general sense, I was updated on it recently. They have done that in a manner that even Commissioner Stewart would be very proud of. And I'm saying all the naval shipyards have done some of that, but Long Beach stands out as the head of the horse race there.
Yes, sir. Mark, could you put up the NOR slide, net operating results?
Which is another point I was going to bring up, but you can discuss that because you have the graph.
Commissioner Bowman, also, and I don't think we have the data with us right now, but clearly if you go back to the peak workload levels of public shipyards in the early 80s, 83, 84 period, and you looked at current employment levels, Long Beach has by far reduced the most employment as a percentage. They are approximately half the size they were in the early 80s, and that has been a very effective downsizing. Typically, if you would lose that many without the kind of management attention that you indicated, you would really have dramatically increased costs, which has not occurred at Long Beach. They are very efficient.
And they were doing it when it wasn't in vogue, to use a slightly contemporary term.
As we look at the net operating results are essentially what you budget against what you spend for the shipyards. And while I recognize that there is no single one financial factor that's telling for all of the shipyards, I chose this one as one that I thought best represented what the shipyards are doing. And you see there from FY88, each year's net operating results depicted by the bars. And we have FY93 on the far right up to the second quarter. These data were provided by the Naval Sea Systems Command. If you look at Long Beach, you'll see that they're in the black, so to speak.
Consistent?
Yes, sir.
Let me get on a little different subject, but one that Mr. McPherson was talking about earlier, and that was capacity of overhaul in the submarine arena, and also the other factor, which is decommissioning, because to decommission a nuclear submarine is not as easy as a lot of people would perceive. Do we have, if we look at the Secretary's recommendation of closing Mare Island, the capacity in Puget Sound to decommission what is projected on the list?
Yes, ma'am. Puget Sound is the only shipyard where the hulks are actually cut up.
Understand that, but you have the reactor, which is capable at Mare Island.
Yes, ma'am. The Navy does have the capacity, even with closing down Mare Island, to defuel the number of submarines which they project they will need to defuel in the out years.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, are you ready for a motion?
Yes, we're ready for a motion. We can have discussion after motion.
Sir, I move on Mare Island. I move the Commission find the Secretary of Defense did not deviate substantially from the force structure plan and final criteria. Therefore, that the Commission adopt the following recommendation of the Secretary of Defense. Close Mare Island Naval Shipyard. Relocate the Combat Systems Technical School Command activity to Dam Neck, Virginia. Relocate one submarine to the Naval Submarine Base, Bangor, Washington. Family housing located at Mare Island Naval Shipyard will be retained as necessary to support Naval Weapons Station Concord.
Do I hear a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
The motion is made by Commissioner Johnson, seconded by Commissioner Stewart, to close Mare Island pursuant to the recommendations of the Secretary of the Navy and Secretary of Defense. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes, sir. Trying to say this in a calm manner here, but my family history goes back 50 years at Mare Island, and I have searched for ways to change the outcome of what I know is inevitable. I've spent more time at Mare Island than any other shipyard, and I still come to the same conclusion that I cannot support keeping it open, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Any further discussion? Commissioner McPherson.
Aye.
Commissioner McPherson votes aye.
Chair votes aye.
Chairman Corder votes aye.
Commissioner Stewart.
Aye.
Commissioner Stewart votes aye.
Commissioner Byron.
Aye. Commissioner Byron votes aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson votes aye.
Commissioner Bowman.
Aye.
Commissioner Bowman votes aye.
Commissioner Cox.
Aye. Commissioner Cox votes aye. On the motion to accept the Secretary of Defense's recommendation to close Mare Island, the vote is 7 in favor, 0 opposed. The motion passes.
Mr. Chairman.